All right. Officially, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining our annual Parliamentary Oversight Report webinar, where we reflect on the annual report that ALTA conducts research on and publishes on parliamentary oversight. Now, usually our review period for the POR, as we call it for short, is from the 1st of July from a year until the end of June for the following year. This allows us to track the processes of the budget review and recommendation reports, the annual reports as submitted by government departments, the reviews by the Auditor General of South Africa, and then the follow-through. Do these recommendations get taken up by the portfolio committees? Are they implemented? Is pressure being put on the executive to act on these recommendations, etc.? We also scrutinize questions and answers and how frequently or on time they are being responded to by ministers and deputy ministers. We also track meeting attendance over this period. Bear in mind, though, we only look for our reports over the last couple of years at 11 portfolio committees, but we are hoping to expand on it in the coming years, but more on that later. So this particular report has been very special in the sense that it did not only reflect on the final year of the sixth Parliament. This report also reflected on the entire legacy of the sixth Parliament. So it was quite a bit of work and finding for a proper approach to not only capture our usual methodology, but also to help the audience understand and readers to see the depth of what goes into parliamentary oversight and activities over these past few years. Needless to say, what we did this year, and we figured the executive and everybody, all of us that are employed, we've got our key performance indicators and our scorecarding. So we wanted to scorecard Parliament. So this report of ours is titled Laudable or Lamentable, the Sixth Parliament's Legacy. So we tried to streamline it to give our impression over these 11 portfolio committees in the Sixth Parliament. But our presentation by our second speaker, Naila Parbu, will delve more into this. But first of all, I would like to introduce you to our panelists that we have here today. First of all, we have Fazila Mohammed. Fazila holds a public administration honours degree and a cum laude certificate in forensics from the University of Western Cape, along with the management certificate from the University of Witwatersrand and an ethics fellowship from the University of Cape Town. With extensive experience in parliamentary processes and the legislative sector, she currently works as a consultant in ethics and legislation. Fazila was the Registrar of Members' Interests in Parliament for 19 years, where she established the ethics framework and investigated over 70 cases of non-compliance. She has led the review of the Code of Ethical Conduct for members and assisted various legislatures in implementing their codes of conduct. After the 1994 election, she served as the head of finance and administration in the Constitutional Assembly that drafted the South African Constitution. So I'm sure you would all agree with me that once we reflect on parliamentary oversight and understanding the legislative sector, we are both humbled and honored to have Fazila as one of our panelists. Our second panelist represents us, the Organization Undoing Tax Abuse, and she is Naila Parbu. Naila is a senior researcher for the Organization Undoing Tax Abuse with a bachelor's and honours degree in information science, as well as a master's in information technology with a specialization in library services. She's currently completing her doctorate in information science at the University of Pretoria. Her academic research focus includes information behavior, information retrieval, information ethics, and cold case investigations. Her active research includes parliamentary oversight, portfolio committee legacies, and indicators for democratic parliament and accountability. With Naila's experience and expertise in research and what she's bringing to the fore on parliamentary oversight, we hope to have a very engaging conversation today looking at ethics and oversight, and what are the recommendations we can make for the 7th Parliament. We also wish to acknowledge that even though this is our 6th report, also on parliamentary oversight, that this project also falls in the larger mandate of a project that is currently being co-funded by the European Union. This falls under the EU's programme for enhancing accountability and transparency, and we are collaborating with the Parliamentary Monitoring Group, also known as PMG, an organisation we are all highly dependent on when it comes to parliamentary oversight and looking at activities within Parliament, as well as Open Up. And they are essentially the ones that drives the data visualization and the structuring of that on PMG's website. Now, us 3 partners, being co-funded by the EU, are working towards developing a parliamentary oversight dashboard. That is why I mentioned that going forward, we will enhance our purview of more of 11 portfolio committees and expand on that, and then also making this information available, open access for policymakers, yourselves that are joining us, parliamentary officials and researchers to contribute to public discourses on this very important topic. Okay, I think that is enough from me at this point. We are the ones that are being honoured by our panelists to present. And I wish to hand over to our first panelist, as I've indicated, Fazila Mohammed, that will be looking into delving parliamentary oversight based on her research and experience. We do ask you to post your questions and comments within the questions and comments box. We are monitoring those and we will be responding to them in the Q&A session after Fazila's presentation. Thank you, welcome, and we hope you enjoy. Fazila, over on to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you for Outa for asking me and inviting me to participate in this panel. I hope you can all hear me clearly. Just let me know if I'm being too soft, if you can't, if I'm not audible. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Because I have I've been in Parliament and been there right at the outset, at the development, right at the beginning in 1996, I joined Parliament. For me, it became quite important that I understand all the nitty-gritties. So I'm going to try and keep my presentation short because I don't want to get into too much detail. So I've done a bit of a high-level discussion, but also to just so the first question we ask ourselves when we say, what is oversight? Right? What is oversight? Oversight is part of a framework of broader good governance in any society. So I would say that oversight in South Africa starts. So, for example, Parliament has a constitutional mandate to oversee the work of the executive, right? But but oversight doesn't start in Parliament. What it means is that, first of all, any head of department in an executive must oversee the work of that particular department. Then you have the executive who oversees the work of the departmental heads. Right? So that's the second step in oversight. The third step in oversight is actually the parliamentary oversight, because what is happening, and then of course there's the Auditor General who does a lot of work in making sure there's accountability and overseeing the spending of money. And then of course you have parliamentary oversight. So parliamentary oversight doesn't exist in its entirety on its own. It has a long history. And actually, that's why I was saying that to develop, what we're doing is it's part of the building blocks of good governance. So we need to start at that particular point. And then, of course, the second question we need to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of oversight? Right? Purpose of oversight is to make sure, and these are basic things, and I think, but it's important to actually frame it in the we need to make sure that Parliament must make sure that the spending is in terms of government priorities. So Parliament, through the budget process, helps to determine the priorities of the state. And then in the next form, it must make sure that money is spent there. The third part of it is, of course, one of the biggest things we have to do is make sure there's responsible, what you call in the ethics field, stewardship of public funds. So we need to make sure that there is responsible stewardship of public funds. And finally, to make sure that that government departments make sure that there is a responsiveness to the social issues in our society. So that's really is the purpose of oversight in a very broad way. I mean, I think many people here are very well informed about that, but I thought it's really important to start with understanding the context in which oversight takes place. How does Parliament conduct its oversight? It does so through the review of the budget. It considers annual reports, and I think this is something you mentioned. It addresses critical issues through oversight visits. And then the executive answers questions in Parliament. SCOPA, for example, makes sure there's accountability. Now, I'm not sure if people know this, but actually the purpose of the SCOPA reports, once the Auditor General drafts its report and SCOPA scrutinizes and holds people to account, one of the purposes of the SCOPA meeting, and I don't know if it still happens, but the purpose of SCOPA is to regularize unauthorized expenditure. So in other words, those reports of SCOPA goes towards making sure that, remember, if you spend money that's unauthorized, budgets are legislated. So the SCOPA report shows the deviations to that particular budget, and it must then be, that report then regularizes expenditure when there's a proper accountability. And if people are unable to account for those, then of course what happens is that you have to pursue charges, etc. So I think people don't understand that that is really the purpose. It's not only to investigate, but to regularize expenditure which can be accounted for. So I think that from that point of view, Parliament does its oversight in multiple ways, right, as we see. What are the questions related? Parliament, everybody knows, Parliament has an oversight model. But is the oversight model adequate? That's one of the questions I think we really need to look at going forward. So, for example, we know that Parliament has they've had a budget office which they've established at great cost to the legislature. The efficacy, because this budget office is really supposed to be the research arm of committees to make sure they have the relevant information to scrutinize the budget in terms of its priorities and to assist. So to what extent, when we do our reports in Parliament, do we scrutinize the work of the budget committee? Because as you know, there is a huge disparity in the capacity of government compared to Parliament. So I think that, I don't know, but when I was there, I think there were over 2,000 institutions Parliament had to oversee. There's this book, I think the National Assembly developed this right at the outset. So obviously, it includes government departments, it includes state-owned entities, and it includes anybody who's funded by the state and who receives a portion of the South African budget. Obviously, Parliament is not able to do all of this. So we need to look at how can we prioritize what is really important. And for many people, oversight is about the financial management. I don't think oversight is only about financial management. So for example, I think that one of the weaknesses of our current system is that if you only look at the individual streams of committees, I don't think the sum of its part makes up the whole. And for this, I mean that, for example, we have a huge amount of what we call transversal issues, right, which face us as a society in South Africa. So let's take the issue of unemployment. Which portfolio committees would deal with unemployment? It would be labor, it would be economic development, those portfolio committees, the finance portfolio committee, etc. So there isn't a single committee that looks at it in its entirety. So I think one of the big weaknesses of Parliament is its inability to address the transversal issues. Take the issues of climate change, for example. What are the government departments? It's the disaster management by COGTA. It's the the Department of what is it? Environmental Affairs. It's Public Works Department in fixing and developing the infrastructure. So what happens is there isn't a broader transversal way in which these issues are addressed. And I think when for many years now, there's been a talk of how committees must be kind of structured so that they can confer on the bigger issues, right? And where there is. And also that will assist, I mean, if the research can be focused in these areas, you can see a huge improvement. On the other hand, you need to look at the systemic issues in particular portfolios. So, the way Parliament conducts its oversight, and one of the things, and this is my own personal view, is that it isn't systematic. So, for example, you'll find an outcry about the performance of a single hospital. And maybe it has got to do with the supply of medication in that hospital or clinics or whatever the case may be. And what you want to do is to see to what extent is this a systemic problem, or is it individual weaknesses in a particular institution? And what happens often is we have oversight, which what I call is episodic. There's this episode, you respond to the episode, but there isn't a systemic response, systematic response to some of the issues that face us in some of the core issues around, for example, education, health, public safety. All of those matters actually require a more systematic engagement on how oversight is done. And, many times, and without being critical, I think that we come into a mindset that we count the numbers. How many times did the committee meet? Have they conducted sufficient investigations and all of that? I think we need to have a broader overview and a strategic response, because what's happening is that sometimes you find the department sets the agenda through the annual report, because the consideration of the annual report is consideration of the information that the department has put in the annual report. And so I know this is these are the bigger questions if you want to make Parliament more efficient and conduct better oversight. Of course, we all know that the Parliament is severely under-resourced. And if we want to be serious about Parliament, we need to make sure, and part of the job of civil society is to look at how these, to make the noise so that Parliament is given sufficient capacity. You can't have Parliament which subsists of a very small budget for oversight compared to the massive spend. It's not going to happen if you say Parliament needs to have more investigations, etc. With the current capacity, it's not doable, to be frank. So I think that looking at Parliament, we need to see where we can come. I mean, there's so much that, and for example, even with the climate change stuff, it's the future issues, right? What are the future issues in economic development? For example, we have, and that's why I'm saying that oversight, often we focus on the spend of money. And of course, corruption, of course, is another transversal issue, which needs to be addressed in the big picture. But I don't want to go into too much detail, because I think that, looking at some of the future issues, we know that South Africa's economy has a huge amount of mining. We also know that mining has a limited lifespan in a particular community. The future planning for our society, because Parliament works on a 5-year term, how much are we thinking about future planning? If this town is dying, I mean, Western area in the West Rand of Johannesburg, I mean, it used to have many, many gold mines. So many of those gold mines have closed. And if you look at the impact on these towns, Randfontein, etc., it's a complete mess. So what we need to say is that oversight not only needs to be looking backward, but must be forward-looking. So that's the other point. Then, of course, we come to the point which is really where my work is. Who oversees the overseer? right? So Parliament and members of Parliament, they require public trust to do the duty that they have to do. People must trust them to be able to do it. And of course, Parliament and all of us, I also, when I was there in 2016, I think we reviewed the Code of Conduct and there's been a subsequent review, and we keep adding rules, right? We keep adding rules. Now, for me, I don't believe, in a nutshell, I can talk a lot about ethics, but in a nutshell, we need to move away from a system of a rules and compliance base. I think transparency overall throughout the parliamentary processes is quite good. I think the transparency is good and the disclosure of members is really excellent. It's a good, it happens well, it happens regularly, etc. But what about the ethos? Because you see, many times we talk about anti-corruption measures. And of course, that's important to ensure there's accountability, to make sure there's consequences, sanctions, etc., for people who don't do what they're supposed to do. But how are we as a society and Parliament leading the call to build an ethical society? And of course, it starts with the behavior of members, which is why the code of conduct for members is really. But I think that in South Africa, we don't have enough discussion about how to improve the public ethos and how to make sure that we're building a society based on ethics. And for me, I think that, we all know that this is the disclosure requirements and these are the standards of ethics. But to what extent that translates in real life for ordinary South Africans and the need for ethical society. If you go to an ethical society, you'll see that everybody waits at the traffic light for the traffic light to go green, irrespective of whether there's a car or not, because everybody accepts the rule of law, right? The second thing is everybody understands that you have to behave in a particular way to create safety for everyone. And I think in South Africa, at that level, we need Parliament to set an example. And one of the things we need to do also, I think, is to set a single standard of ethical behavior for every elected representative. And the same thing applies for public servants across national, provincial, and local. So I think you need two sets of codes. And also part of that work of Parliament is when it oversees the executive, it needs to say, one of the standard questions is, what are your steps that you've done to make sure that ethics prevails? Ethics is not only about your financial stuff, but it's also about your work ethic, about how government departments actually make sure that people deliver the kind of services they have. And then finally, I'm not going to talk a lot because I think I've already gone over my limit. Yes, I have. So, but the other thing is the role of civil society, etc., in making sure that oversight happens. I've long said that if I was in an NGO monitoring oversight, one of the things I would do is set up 10 different help hotlines, one for education, one for water, one for whatever the core services are, safety and security, etc. And it must be an SMS line where people put in, when I was in Parliament, I remember once I had a meeting with one of the speakers there. And she was saying, I'm so shocked that we in Parliament never heard that there was no water in some village for 5 years, right? Now, of course, Parliament can only conduct its investigation if it knows the information. And who then compiles that information about non-delivery in a systematic way? And I think that that's something that, it's not a hard to do, it's not expensive, and it will really give you a handle on systematic problems that are encountered by citizens in South Africa. So from my point of view, and of course, the NGOs have a critical role to play to make sure that Parliament is responsive, that it's accountable to the people, and that, in fact, it fulfills its constitutional mandate. So I think that that's my point of view. I really wanted to bring up topics which could facilitate the debate, not to kind of critique anyone, but just really that's my point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fazila. I must admit, a question did arise, and I started getting excited because there were no questions, which means I could ask you a couple because there's such rich information you gave. I think particularly you made Naila and I very interested because and excited. We have backgrounds in ethics also. So every time somebody speaks ethics, we listen. But let me also not hog this channel and share this question with you. It's also in the chat. It is a long question. So, but let me also read it for our participants and then for yourself, Fazila. In light of the critical role that Parliament plays in ensuring responsible stewardship of public funds and the broader oversight mandate, how can we enhance parliamentary oversight to be more strategic and forward-looking, especially in sectors like mining? And I even want to add water. We know there are immense water concerns in Gauteng that is going to be and is already debilitating, especially now when we look at the seventh parliament. And there are follow-throughs on the question, like the role civil society can play in bridging this capacity gap. And then how do we build an ethical society with a stronger focus on the public ethos? So there are a couple of components there for you, Fazila. I'll give you the freedom to respond to them. And also, I think in the back of our minds, you said backward looking, right? So we can scrutinize the sixth parliament as much as we want, but we will only really be constructive if we contribute forward looking on the seventh parliament.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. These are all very difficult questions, and it's a question that all of us need to put our minds to. But I think that having these conversations at the start of answering these questions. So, for example, how can we be more strategic? And I think that, what happens is I think there needs to be a complete review of the parliamentary oversight model. Because in a way, it is very useful. I mean, I was there when Parliament developed this oversight model. And the oversight model was, in a sense, a hit and a miss, before the model. So every chairperson had the leeway to run the committee in which they did. And if the committee chair wasn't effective, then there was a problem. So the oversight model gave structure to what oversight should be. But I think nowadays it's become a bit mechanistic. In other words, tick the box. We've considered the annual report, right? Blah, blah, blah. But I think, for example, what is the strategic question in Parliament at the moment? How does a member of Parliament distinguish their political party role versus their role in terms of oversight and accountability? Because you see what happens, and I think many people know this, that before any committee meeting, all the parties have study groups and they have a line in which they're going to take. So in fact, the minister attends the study group, but not necessarily the portfolio committee, because he's put forward his view to the members of that committee, and then they come and they push a line. But look, I mean, we live our democracy is one of a proportional representation, and the parties play a pivotal role. So there is that constant tension between the party role and public accountability. And so that's one of the strategic questions that we need to highlight as civil society. We need to say more thinking needs to go and more public pressure needs to go to push members away from single party lines, actually looking at the needs of people. I mean, the Constitutional Court in the Zuma matter made that distinction very clear. So I think that that's one of the strategic questions. The other strategic question really is looking forward, learning from the past and looking forward. I mean, we know that some departments are regular culprits. They come with the same Auditor General reports. The committee shouts at them. I don't think effective oversight is, when the committee comes there and they deal with the matter, you just tell me when I must stop, okay? So when people come to the committee, the chairperson gives a huge shout. I once, when I was doing that review of committees at the time, one of the things that that I was very interested was I did a full, like a 5-6 year review of one of the education committees. This is quite a while ago because I've left Parliament for long ago. But what I found is they did a review. They called all the officials from the department. But to have effective oversight, you don't get there and ambush an official. You say to the official, we want a proper response to the following things. And then once they've done this response, so there's no ambushing, then there must be a report and a recommendation that goes to the department, allowing them in a fixed time to respond to those problems. And then what happens next year if those problems are repeated? So what happens often is Parliament will go there, they'll shout at the officials, and the officials will be cowed or whatever, or they just feel, oh my goodness, this is just the same old story. So we need to change that ethos. So the review of that, then let me move on to the next. I don't want to get into too much detail in everything because we'll be here the whole day. The next thing will be about the public ethos. I think that all of us have got a responsibility. You know, I drive often. Sorry, apologies. I thought I'd switched it off. Man, sorry. Sorry about that. And then, of course, with the ethics thing, I think all of us need to put our mind on how we can say what is completely unacceptable in our society. More and more, we're finding that that corruption, I mean, you know, people are showing that they're not prepared to tolerate corruption. And I think all political parties are listening and understanding that. I won't say all, but most of them understand that corruption is not tolerated in our society. So, yeah. Then, I mean, you know, the question of sanctions are important, but remember that public shaming is really important. You know, when a member gets reprimanded by the House, those things are public shaming for the members. And I think that we mustn't underestimate the importance of that in terms of the codes of ethics, etc. Let me leave it at that. Let's have a conversation further, and then we can see where we go from there here.
Thank you so much, Fazila. That was really insightful. And once again, I can imagine in my own head responding and asking more questions. I do see Masejo posted a question here in the chat, but in terms of our timelines and our planning, I think that would be good to hand over to our second panelist. In the meantime, Fazila, if you can perhaps look at Masejo's question, think about it, and then once we are done with Naila's presentation, we can return to this within the Q&A session. I would like to ask our other participants, please don't hesitate to post your questions. If we do not get to them within the webinar, we do respond to them afterwards in a mailer. So we will have you covered. Right, I'm going to hand over to Naila Parbu, as I said, proudly representing ALTA. And she was the main driving force behind our 6th annual Parliamentary Oversight Report. And she's going to give us an indication of our main findings, concerns, and recommendations. Naila, on to you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I just want to make sure that you can see my slides. Are you able to see it? Great, perfect. Okay. Good afternoon, participants. So I will be discussing ALTA's Parliamentary Oversight Report. Okay, just want to see if we switch. Am I changing slides? Not yet. Okay. Now? All right, perfect. Okay, the aim of parliamentary oversight reports are to hold government accountable, to monitor what has been done, and to also identify any gaps or challenges that have been solved or standing over to the next year, or in this case, the 7th Parliament, and also making recommendations. ALTA has developed parliamentary oversight reports each year, as you can see below, and you are also welcome to scan our QR code to find the link. As Rachel mentioned, we have named this report Laudable or Lamentable, 6th Parliament Legacy, and we did take a slightly different approach to the core by analyzing work from the 1st of July 2023 to the 30th of June 2024. However, we also reflect on various aspects from the entire sixth Parliament. Now, my methodology was to analyze 11 selected portfolio committee legacy reports, the BRRR reports, annual reports, and also OUTA's assessments on these various projects and programs. It also aligns with the broader goals of an EU co-funded project that is partnered by OUTA, PMG, as well as OpenUp, while maintaining OUTA's voice. So we do have 3 guiding questions, and that is, what challenges and opportunities did the selected PCs deal with? How did they deal with these challenges, and were their efforts laudable or lamentable? And what recommendations can be made for the 7th Parliament? Now, our key challenges and findings were that the country has faced multiple failures in service delivery with regards to water, sanitation, electricity, and transport. We have still not yet eradicated the bucket toilet system, and we also have non-payment for service delivery. With regards to civil societies, there's poor consideration for public input, leading to sorry about that, and inadequate accessibility and transparency in Parliament. For the executive, ministers that are implicated in the state capture or are deemed incompetent still remain within the office. For the departments and entities, there's a widespread of corruption and mismanagement, and the national development plans as well as SDGs have not yet been prioritized, and we still experience environmental issues. With regards to parliamentary challenges, there's an oversight of 2.136 trillion budget hindrance by political infighting and resource limitation. And there's also inadequate training of PMs. With our recommendations, we look at civil societies that need better engagement with Parliament. Parliament should also improve training to ensure proper taking of bills, improve public participation using digital tools with virtual hearings, surveys, as well as consultations. Portfolio committees should cut wasteful and poorly performing programs with Treasury support as well. Departments and entities must align with the NDPs as well as the SDGs and develop a system to track infrastructure spending with the public parliamentary database to prevent mismanagement. If we look at the quantitative indicators, we'll start with the portfolio committee meetings. Now, COVID-19 as well as the 2022 parliamentary fire did have an impact on meeting attendance, and it also required them to make use of online methods. Due to the sixth Parliament, PCs averaged 26 meetings per year, and this is a decrease from the previous year. If we look at specific committees, for example, mineral resources and energy, there's been an increase with theirs from 32 to 36. For corporate governance, it has dropped to 27 from 45. With water and sanitation, there also has been a decline to 17, even with the water crisis. Home Affairs, we see a notable reduction after the electoral amendment bill, which was enacted in April 2023. And then with health, also meetings have fallen to 17 after the controversials with regards to the National Health Insurance Bill that was passed in May this year. The overall decline in meetings stem from the election preparation and governance stabilization of the COVID period. OUTA's initiative to establish benchmarking for committee meetings is based on historical data aimed to hold Parliament accountable and ensure committees actively address pressing issues. Ministers as well as deputy ministers are vital, and participation in PC meetings foster open discussion, clarifying decisions, reviewing budgets, and also responses to challenges from committee members as well as opposing parties. If we look at the attendance for execs, there has been a declining rate that we can see, and this has dropped from 43% to 37% across committees. If we look at a Home Affairs attendance, it has dropped to 46%, and this is very concerning because it was electoral year this year, or election year, sorry. And then water and sanitation, so a drastic fall to 41%, and then mineral resources and energy also experienced a drop to 11%. Committees like higher education, mineral resources, home affairs, as well as women, youth, and persons with disabilities report consistently low executive attendance, indicating difficulties in engaging with parliamentary oversight. The Department of Higher Education also faced scrutiny over NAFSIS irregularities, emphasizing the need for better executive attendance to address critical issues. Low attendance, especially paired with poor departmental performance, raises question about the government's commitment to effective oversight in addressing national issues. If we look at question and answers, Parliament holds ministers accountable mainly through a formal question and reply system, allowing MPs to pose specific questions for timely responses. Outer tracks the volume of questions asked and responses received, focusing on submissions through the National Assembly. The Minister of Health received the highest number of questions, totaling at 222, and the Minister of Women, Youth, and Persons with Disability received a fewer amount of 47 questions. If we look at the written questions, on average, only 39 were answered on time and 61% were late. If you look at the best performer, it was the Minister of Forestry, Fishery, and Environment that responded to questions on time, that is 81%. With poor performance, that was the Minister of Transport with 92% late response rate. Oral questions, there is 78% that was on time and 22% that were late. 100% on time was given to COGTA, as well as Forestry and Fishery, Higher Education, and Public Enterprises. And then with 92% on time was the Minister of Health. If we look at constituency periods, MPs are required to maintain constituency offices for public contact, especially for communication between elected representatives as well as constituents. Parliament is developing a Google map to display locations and contact information for constituency offices, aiming to improve public accessibility. Many MPs do make use of social media such as WhatsApp for direct community engagement, but there is no data currently measuring the effectiveness of this interaction. OUTA recommends that the 7th Parliament should include constituency engagement reports in official records, and this will enhance transparency regarding service delivery as well as taxpayers' fund usage. OUTA tracks annual constituency periods to assess MPs' engagement, but this excludes designated constituency days, which is usually on a Monday. With regards to benchmarking, comparing and benchmarking against best practices is critical for enhancing the oversight functions of PCs and aligning policies with established goals. OUTA's research indicates a reliance on internal government as well as parliamentary sources, which can also limit comprehensive oversight. We therefore recommend that they also make use of the National Development Plan 2030, as well as the medium-term strategic frameworks, as well as the National Growth Plan frameworks, and there are others on the screen as well. With regards to international, we would recommend the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the African Union 2063. There are others as well displayed on the screen. OUTA identifies a lack of consistent benchmarking across committees, highlighting the need for improvement. Expanding these oversight capacities with a wide range of resources is necessary for effective governance. So while doing the report, we also looked at the oversight, and there were some shared issues like ineffective collaboration amongst government levels, leading to inefficiencies, demand for additional funding and sustainable funding models. And some pieces also didn't actually do any oversight visits during 2023. We also looked at ideas for improvements, which was strengthening partnerships among entities, as well as enhancing intergovernmental communications, accessing funding models for key agencies, and then also filling clinical and non-clinical vacancies to improve service delivery in critical areas. Some interesting points that we also picked up was there's a discrepancy between policy recommendations and actual implementation, focus on urgent social issues like gender-based violence as well as youth unemployment, and then also implementing modern technologies to improve service delivery and infrastructures for all PCs. Now, with regards to OUTA's perspective, we look at communications. South Africa has not completed the migration of analog to digital broadcasting, missing the international deadline and incurring costs. OUTA calls for stronger legislation to rebuild trust in SABC and a new funding model. With regards to COGTA, local government performance has declined, affecting service delivery and economic development. Critical frameworks are underutilized in disaster management and climate responses. OUTA highlights mismanagement in the Community Works Program and calls for urgent reform and better reporting of municipal funds. And then the FFE, OUTA stresses the need for improving air quality, disaster preparedness, and innovative waste solutions. We are also anticipating the implementation of the new Climate Change Act. With regards to health, the resignation of the Minister of Health was looked at due to his involvement in the 150 million digital vibe kickback scandal. The committee engaged thousands of public participation for the NHI bill. There was support received. However, there was concerns about the funding feasibility. However, these criticisms weren't addressed and the bill was still passed. OUTA views this as a campaign tactic and expects legal challenges. With regards to education, OUTA does criticize NAFSIS for hiring unlicensed device providers for students' allowance, as well as filing a complaint against the CEO of the alleged corruption. A crisis emerged when NAFSIS kept accommodation funding to 45,000 rand, leaving many students without housing. OUTA supports Ngogo's dismissal following misconduct. And then despite its higher education minister chaos in the higher education, Minister Blaine remains in his position without consequence. With regards to home affairs, OUTA has advocated for the electoral reform, particularly to allow independent candidates. OUTA expressed concern over the minister missing the deadline to establish an electoral reform consultation panel, and the amendments law permits independent candidates to run in the election, which OUTA welcomes. We also expect stronger intervention in resolving the government printing works ongoing IT crisis. With regards to the MRE, OUTA opposes car powership contract due to the transparency issues, environmental concerns, and has sought to overturn the license granted by NERSA. The viability of these contracts is questionable. Then with public enterprises, state-owned companies have heavily drained at the fiscal budget by excessive bailouts, primarily for Eskom, Transnet, Denel, as well as SAA. A recent SIU interim report revealed long-standing corruption as well as mismanagement at SAA, which has required a 38.1 billion in bailouts since April 2018, and the implicated have not yet been punished. With regards to transport, OUTA raises concerns over transport entities failing to submit annual reports in financial statements punctually, especially from SAMSA, which also lacks a CEO since 2016. Concerns were also noted regarding the Department of Transport and the driver's license card account not procuring a new license card machine. OUTA also welcomes the committee's push for the minister to finalize a new road infrastructure funding policy following the end of Gauteng's e-tolls. Then we look at water. Despite managing the bucket eradication program, approximately 10,000 bucket toilet systems still remain, and some municipalities continue to install them. A new national sanitation framework to prohibit bucket systems has been approved but not publicly released. OUTA urges the 7th Parliament to implement policies to prevent further installation and to find solutions to replacing existing ones. OUTA also launched the Water Community Action Network, which is known as WaterCan, to foster collaboration among civil societies, experts, and the public to address various water challenges. With regards to women, youth, and persons with disability, OUTA's campaign for transparency and public participation in appointing new commissioners to the Commission of Gender Equality, which face governance issues and scandals. OUTA, alongside 40 other CSOs, urged the PC to enhance public participation. They raised concerns about 8 of the 24 candidates, and on the 28th of February 2023, the President appointed 5 new commissioners, but 2 of them were among the ones flagged by OUTA. So, laudable or lamentable? Out of the 11 portfolio committees we analyzed, only forestry, fishery, and the environments show a lot of improvement, deeming it laudable. The other 10 are lamentable. Outer continues to strive for good governance, accountability, and transparency. However, South Africa still faces many long-standing issues such as electricity, water, transport, corruption, organized crime, and maladministration. There are many opportunities that have been missed specifically due to the failure to act decisively against state capture, weak intervention, and minor to no consequences for implicated MPs. We believe that we need stronger oversight mechanisms, and the 7th Parliament has the opportunity for meaningful reform by structural change, improved governance, and effective allocation and oversight of national government spending. So we have a little bit of a caution. Accountability is long overdue. Without action, Parliament risks continued ineffectiveness. Thank you for your attention. Are there any questions?
All right, thank you, Naila. We wish to emphasize once again on the Parliamentary Oversight Report and our findings of lamentability and laudability, that please bear in mind that the focus is predominantly on the portfolio committees, so looking at the engine rooms of Parliament. We do not delve into parliamentary administration, although these are really difficult to split at times. We also acknowledge within our Parliamentary Oversight Report the good work that is being done in the portfolio committees. We realize that they have numerous duties. Sometimes they receive the reports from the government departments the day before or the night before, and they're put under pressure to be prepared. They've got oversight visits and various other responsibilities that, under tough circumstances and restricted resources, makes their tasks more difficult. And we're also aware that through the Research Office and the Legislative or the Legally Advice Office does also provide input and support, but we also do not delve into that in our Parliamentary Oversight Report. But we are highly dependent on input from the National Assembly table as well, which we would like to thank for their contributions to our research. Now, Okhone has posted a question here as well. Naila, you can read it, but I will also share it so we have the participants. In light of our findings of Parliament's oversight as predominantly lamentable, what concrete steps should the 7th Parliament take to ensure a more effective system of accountability, especially when we look at the challenges being identified and faced?
Thank you for your question, Okhone. So with regards to recommendations to the 7th Parliament is holding all of these PCs accountable with higher consequences, looking at whether the funding that they are using is actually being used for the right reasons into the right programs. We found that some of them were requesting money for more programs, but weren't completing the previous programs, or they requested funding and never made use of that funding. So we need to actually take all of that back and give it to the ones that are more deserving. In terms of limited resources, like I said, fund distribution, making sure that we actually give the right funding to the organizations, or sorry, the entities and the PCs, but also finding other resources, like we said, benchmarking against other organizations. And then looking at widespread of corruption. We always have corruption. We want to change everything. We're trying to change everything, but there's always going to be some sort of corruption at some point. So we need stricter guidelines, that's all, and stricter rules and regulations.
Indeed. And I must say, South Africa is not the only country in the world that has to face corruption. This is an epidemic throughout. And we are very lucky to have a robust media and civil society network that calls this out. Perhaps just a final question. If we look at international benchmarking and even parliamentary responsiveness, what recommendations do you have towards improving parliamentary responsiveness and public participation, Naila?
So, like you mentioned in the beginning, we do have our parliamentary dashboard, the Parliameter, that will be launched early next year, that will give access to public to actually access that information. But also, I've been doing research on the indicators for democratic parliaments, which have 25 indicators or targets, and then about 500 assessments. So looking at those assessments and seeing whether South Africa does apply to those assessments, and in terms of responsiveness and benchmarking against those indicators as well. The other one is also the NDPs as well as the SDGs. Some of the PCs are implementing the NDPs, but SDGs not so much. And that's one of the things that we need to do as Parliament or within Parliament to make those changes.
Thank you so much for that, Naila. I am going to hand over to Fazila and reflect on the question that Masego asked a little bit earlier today, well, or in this session. And to consider in this response also, how do you see going forward then the 7th Parliament, and what recommendation can you make for it to improve parliamentary oversight? If I can repeat again to remind everybody of Masego's question. We've observed members of Parliament, including cabinet members, disregarding parliamentary subcommittee meetings to account for certain crucial issues without any punishment. In many cases, there's hardly any punishment. And if there are, it is very little, resulting in a slap on the wrist or a few days' salary as a penalty. So how can this misbehavior be corrected going forward? Fazila, I don't know your input on that.
Thank you, Rachel. I think that, when we talk about remember when I talked about the contradiction between kind of the members' party political role versus the kind of accountability of the executive. And what happens there, and it's a political problem. It's a deep-rooted political problem. If you are a junior member and the minister is a very senior member in the executive structures of your organization, the very few members will be willing to put out their neck. And it's a problem. So it's something that we need to push for. It's based. So I think it also is, I think there's a lot to be said for a very strong speaker. Because one of the things, I know when Frini Jinwala was there, she herself was so senior in the organization and everybody was quite terrified of her. She from her chair in the House, would name the members who hadn't attended the committee meetings, etc. So it also depends on the parliamentary leadership to ensure, so the presiding officers, etc., to actually bring this issue. Then, of course, the other big thing is the tracking mechanism of members who don't respond to issues and all of that. I mean, as far as I know, the story about how do you track responses and proper accountability by members, by executive members, has been in the cards. And I think that, with IT these days, I mean, when we started, it was like a manual kind of database, and to populate it, etc., was very difficult. And I think that Parliament must make some effort. So even with the annual reports, they don't have to scrutinize everything. You need to say, what are the criteria? Get the computer, get data, some data analyst to scrape back 5 years of a particular department and the issues, highlight it. And so the members don't have to read these massive tomes, So I think that we need to move with technology around that. I think the other big thing is to restructure the committee. When I did a review for one of the legislatures on oversight. And as you see now, because there isn't a party with a single majority, what you will have is that in every committee, attendance will be quite critical and members will be quite stretched. If you look at it, right, if a member is attending 53 meetings a year and they have 10 weeks of constituency work, it means they have 43 meetings a year to discuss big issues. They're not one, so that means in every week they're discussing a really critical issue. And if they don't have support, they can't do it. So I think the restructuring of committees is one of the most important things that must happen. And I think with that will come with the collaboration, etc. So I think that those are really important stuff that we can look ahead.
Thank you so much for that, Fazila. I'm looking also in terms of our time, and we have reached the end of our webinar. time does tend to fly in this regard. I'm very excited what you said, Fazila, on the collaboration, which is something also as ALTA we've been motivating quite a bit. It's easy to see parliaments or civil society as a watchdog criticizing parliament, but it's vested interest for all of us to want to collaborate. I love what you're saying on going forward and utilizing technology. It is 2024 after all. I am aware in discussions with Parliament that this is something they are working towards, but it links in perfectly with our Parliamentary Oversight dashboard. So I would like to thank you, Fazila, for gracing us with your presence, your insight, and your experience. Thank you for giving your time for this opportunity to reflect on parliamentary oversight. Naila, I also want to thank you for the hours and the weeks and the months you fit into the Parliamentary Oversight Report. We could not have done this without you. And then also behind the screens, the entire outer team that contributed to research, analysis, editing, formatting, refinement, and publishing. We shared the links in the chat session for you. And then I would like to tell everybody, please watch this space. We are progressing so well with this project. We want to engage with you more, hear your input, and look at opportunities for collaborating. We are fully confident that you will find value in this parliamentary oversight dashboard that we are calling Parlimeter. It's not yet officially launched, but once it is, we will have another event to bring it under your attention and to get your input and collaboration. So thank you for sharing your lunchtime with us, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye.